What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at the basics of formal writing and the writing process that you'll be using when you're writing your essays. Formal writing is different from informal writing in the sense that what you'll be using is very strict rules of English, as opposed to informal writing, which allows you to detour away a little bit from that and to write in different sorts of ways and to use different kinds of language. For instance, things like colloquial expressions, things like slang, or the rest. Whereas formal writing really wants you to stick to very strict set of rules. When you start writing essays, particularly in your senior years, you'll be focusing on making sure that your writing keeps to a very formal standard and that it goes to specifically and directly to the point. So let's go through just the basics of it first. Formal writing is what you should be looking to achieve. And there are a number of qualities to formal writing, which is what we're going to outline in this video. And we'll also go through a couple of very common errors in formal language and just go through very, very briefly the processes and the things that you need to look at doing when you're writing in an essay to make sure that you screen out those errors and make sure that they don't creep back into your essay writing work. Okay, so first of all, we're just going to look at the perspective in which you write at. So your perspective should be third person, it should be impersonal, and should be objective. Now I'll explain all of those terms. Now third person you'd be probably familiar with from your narrative writing, which is that you're not involved, which means immediately you're not using the word I. The second thing is it's impersonal, so it's not related to anything to do with you or anyone that you know. And finally, it's objective, which means it should be, technically speaking, free of bias. Now you might be wondering, okay, well, if I'm doing an essay where I'm using my opinion, wouldn't that be not objective? Well, there are ways around it, and we'll go through those in a little while. That is the main aspect of formal writing that you'd be looking at, is particularly the third person and the impersonal side. Really, what you should be trying to do in constructing your argument is distance it from you. Even if you're putting things in there that are your opinion or are not necessarily supported by fact or are based on your interpretation, then these qualities still apply to your writing. It's just that they're going to be applied in a somewhat of a different sense. But we'll go through that in a sec. Everything you'll be writing is based on fact, so everything needs to have evidence. So when you wonder about why you put quotes in your essays, that's the reason why. It's because everything you write is based on that word fact. What you're constructing, your interpretation, is based on fact in your stimulus text. What your discussion is about is not so much the stimulus material as such, that's used for your evidence. What you're discussing is the ideas that are being presented to you in your essay question. So have a look at that and make sure that when you're writing, you are basing your work on the facts that are in there. Constructing the argument is as simple as choosing which fact supports your case. Because of the fact that you're required to interpret things, you're interpreting facts from the text. And you're doing that in a way which is your own opinion, but you're presenting it in a way which is those qualities above. So third person, impersonal, and objective. So you're not saying, I believe this. You're just saying that through your interpretation, this is the idea that's come out, and not link it to you in any way. You allow this to support your definition through that. So if I use a quote from text, I'm not using it in isolation. I am using it to support whatever idea it is I'm trying to raise, whatever point of discussion that I'm trying to develop through my argument and how it responds to the question. But we'll go through that again a little bit later too. Okay, your grammar. Your grammar must be perfect. What I mean by perfect as in it follows every rule to the letter. There are some rules which are applied a little bit more or a little bit differently than what you would normally expect, particularly things like contractions, for instance. But there are other sorts of rules which are just applied a lot more formally. So for instance, the use of colloquialisms, for instance, is fine in informal scenarios and when you're writing a letter or something along those lines. But in a formal writing sense, what it does is create something which is vague. Also, particularly in cases like vernacular or language which is used by different groups of people, not necessarily easy to understand. So one reason why we as teachers teach and preach that you should be using formal language in your essays is to make sure that you're using specific language which can be interpreted amongst many races and cultures. That means that instead of using expressions that only people in Australia would get, you're using language which is universal, which if anyone has learned English through the proper channels, they would understand. That's the reason why we do it. What you need to do is make sure that you're writing in complex sentences so that each idea is detailed and is explained, that it's impersonal. So for that reason, it must use proper English. Consult a grammar guide if you are unsure. If you're not sure about how to do the formal writing process, And there are a number of rules. There are too many to go through here. But if you are unsure about your formal writing style, make sure you look at a grammar guide to just look at the kinds of expressions, particularly, that are not considered to be formal English. Focus on how you would construct your sentences in a formal manner. So, for instance, instead of saying, I think this, you can just write, this is true because. Really just go into that argument based on your evidence and your facts. All right, your language. Now, your language that you'll be using is described as what's called scholarly or academic. It just means it avoids opinion, it avoids emotion, and it avoids unnecessarily descriptive statements, which you're not writing something emotionally, saying we must do this in order to survive. That's out. You're not doing it in a way that's opinionated, so I believe this, or this is wrong, this is right. That's an example particularly of opinion, and it's something that comes up quite a lot, saying that it's a horrible act or something like that. That's an evidence of opinion. You can represent it's horrible through the facts, but just not say that it's horrible. And finally, unnecessarily descriptive statements. So you don't go overboard with your adjectives. You describe something if it needs to be described, if that suits your argument, but otherwise you shouldn't really be trying to use a lot of adjectives in essay writing anyway. Now, academic language means that you're presenting facts indicating knowledge, so what you've learned and what you believe based on the material that you've covered, but also based on the stimulus text, based on how you understand the question and how you are communicating that you understand what the question is asking through the facts of your stimulus that you've been given. So whether that be a book, whether that be a film, whether that be something that's part of the exam, you are representing that you know how to answer a question based on it. You're indicating your knowledge through the construction of your work and through your writing. It also must be direct and explicit, so as in not vague, to avoid those sort of waffling qualities. So when you write, you sort of skirt around the point and you go really, really broadly, but don't really focus on anything. So you say that it's bad for everyone, or who's everyone? Okay, explain who that is. If it's a group of people, that's enough. You don't have to necessarily go person to person and say it's bad for this person, not this person. You can just say that it's bad for a group of people like these. And that will help to make it a little bit more direct and explicit rather than just saying everyone, because that isn't true for virtually anything. I don't think there's anything in the world which applies to everyone. Make sure that you are being very direct and what we say explicit, so you're talking directly to what it is you're referring to in a text in terms of the issue, whatever it is. Once you've organized your writing, you're basically working on how you can turn your interpretation into facts which are based on the text rather than just simply skirting around your own opinion. What I mean by that is how you can turn your understanding of the question into a fact. There's a process for doing this. Really, by providing your own definition, which is the first bit. So if you're saying, how is this true, and you give a definition for it, then that is you using evidence, which is what your definition is based on, using your own interpretation and then backing up that interpretation through evidence. So really, your interpretation becomes fact through that. And you base your argument in your discussion on, as I said, your evidence, and you're writing this in a formal way. By being specific and referring directly to what it is that you're writing about, you are essentially tackling the process of formal writing head on, and you don't really need to know too much more than that. The main thing is that you need to have those definitions, or you need to have a keyword from the question, which you use frequently as a way to support the idea that you're using a fact from the question, you're using your interpretation, you're using your skills and knowledge, and you're writing about it in a way that shows you understand what it is the question's asking and what it is that you need to do to answer it. So let's look at some things to avoid when you're writing your essay, and just some basic rules of grammar and also just basic formal writing rules to avoid when you're writing. First of all, contractions. So I mentioned this before. You use words such as won't, shouldn't, can't, won't, etc. are contractions, and they're in formal English. While they're a usual grammar rule, and usually they're quite acceptable, have contractions in your writing to sort of ruin it a little bit, and it just has no place in formal writing. So avoid those, particularly when you're writing essays. You use the words you, or I, we, and us. Your essay is distant from you. Even if you're writing about something that's related to you, as in related to young people or otherwise, you still avoid using we and us. You just refer to them, to whoever you're talking about, as young people or teenagers, or however you're referring to them in the question. If you're writing a speech, yes, you would use you and I, we and us, because you'll be pretending to be someone who is a younger person and you'll be taking possession of that. However, in an essay, you won't be. it's something to particularly avoid in essay writing. Next thing is unnecessary adjectives. What unnecessary adjectives are is if you use very colorful language and use lots of adjectives to describe things that you're talking about from a text or even just an idea. Try and reduce the amount of adjectives that you use. I mean, really, unless you're actually referring to something specifically and discussing it, you don't really need to use adjectives that much in an essay at all. Make sure that if it seems unnecessary and you can just replace that with one word, that you do so whenever possible. Next thing is vague and unspecific points. Try and eliminate any points which don't really talk about anything. What I mean by that is avoid anything which is sort of half, not really, we're getting there, but not quite. Talk about specifics. Find specific things that you can talk about, whether that be a specific group of people, whether that be an age group, whether that be an idea, a theme, whatever it is. Don't sort of generally get there. Try and find a word and a keyword at that, which you keep referring to, which refers specifically to what it is you're talking about. Opinionated statements, as I mentioned before. Avoid words like saying it's horrible or this or that is right or wrong, because those show off opinion and they're not really things you can base on any particular kinds of facts. You can demonstrate through your facts that something might be horrible, but you don't say that it is horrible in an essay. That would indicate bias and it wouldn't necessarily reflect an argument. It would just reflect that this is my opinion and this is what I'm trying to convince you. But I'm not using facts to say that. I'm using my own opinions. And really, you should be trying to use facts wherever you can. And the last thing is starting with conjunctions. Now, I know this is something that comes up a lot in people's creative writing. And certainly, conjunctions are things that come up quite a lot when you're starting sentences, when you're writing creatively. But in essay writing, it's a big, big, big thing that you can't do. So if you're writing something and then you start your next sentence with and, please don't. Or even but. Because what it does is it could easily have been attached to another sentence. When you're writing an essay, you should be writing complex sentences anyway. And the other thing is that your essay writing is not necessarily about flow as much as it is in creative writing. What your essay is about is communicating facts in a logical and airtight fashion. So starting with conjunctions is unnecessary and is a sign of informal English. So do try and avoid that when you're writing your essays. Otherwise, that's basically it for the basics of language essays, of language for essays, and the kinds of writing styles you should be employing in essays. So until next time, I'll see you later.